Right, so the conduct of Maccabi Tel Aviv fans in Amsterdam last week and the mainstream media's horribly one-sided response to that, painting the attacks perpetrated by the presence of aggressive and abusive Israeli fans being instead implied as an attack upon them, as a pogrom even, as anti-Semitic of course, has imploded in the face of those promoting such rancid dishonesty, including not just mainstream news outlets, notably Sky News particularly, but also world leaders from across the Western world as independent media exposed the truth, right down to a 14-year-old kid called Bender, who did a better news report on the conduct of Israeli fans from the streets of Amsterdam than our own televised media ever could. An angle to this story that truly destroys any notion that this was an anti-Semitic attack on a vile group of football thugs, though, blasting apart that ongoing dishonest narrative that criticising Israel equates to Judaism itself, to elevate Israel to a level beyond normal approach, but which also endangers every single Jew, pro-Zionist and anti-Zionist alike around the world as a consequence, has been the inconvenient story of the Jewish remembrance service due to be held in memory of the events of Kristallnacht, which ended up being cancelled entirely because of the football thugs. We're not seeing Israel compared to Judaism itself then, therefore. We're seeing it considered actually as more important. Because what politician or UK news outlet certainly has called this travesty out? A Jewish remembrance service cancelled because of Israelis. What's really the anti-Semitic story here? Right, so still the fallout from the thuggery exhibited by Maccabi Tel Aviv football fans beginning last Wednesday is rumbling on, where the condemnation rightly falls on Israel from right-thinking people who are aware of the story and get their news from honest outlets. They all know the fans were pulling down Palestinian flags from buildings, burning them even. Attacks were going on in the streets. The minute's silence in memory of those lost in the Valencia floods at the match itself was jeered and booed. If these had been British football fans, there would have been widespread condemnation and bans being handed out. It's Israel, though, so instead, Dutch people cop the blame instead. Certainly it hasn't just been the media doing this. Politicians from Justin Trudeau to Joe Biden, David Lammy, Keir Starmer have all come out supportive of Israel in this story. Organisations like the Holocaust Educational Trust, the Anne Frank Institute, especially disgusting given Frank's history in Amsterdam. Not that this organisation has anything to do with her, just rides off her name. The Board of Deputies, the Holocaust Memorial Day Trust, all defending Israel over the course of these events. There was no violence before Maccabi fans descended upon Amsterdam, and it's quiet now they've gone. All except the ongoing examination of the events, of course, and the consequences of it, and how this should reflect on those organisations who claim to stand up for Jewish people. Yet here's a prime example of where actually the opposite ended up being true. You see, whilst they leapt to the defence of Israeli thuggery and violence, a rather sad statement had to be issued as a consequence by the anti-Zionist Jewish collective in the Netherlands, Erev Rav. Not heard of them? Not heard their name raised in light of these alleged pogroms happening in their midst? Well, these are the Jewish people the mainstream media would call the inconvenient truth, perhaps. The Jewish people affected by the violence in Amsterdam by Israelis. But of course, they are anything but pro-Israel, and therefore we can't upset the narrative we're being fed for Israel's sake, can we? Here's their statement on what these Israeli football fans did for them, affected them and their safety as Jews. The city of Amsterdam deserves better. Erev Rav strongly condemns the Amsterdam police's handling of recent events involving football fans over 2 consecutive nights in the city. We are deeply concerned that instead of restraining groups who cause disturbances in the city, including tearing down Palestinian flags from private residences and engaging in racist chanting, the police allowed the situation to escalate to widespread street violence. It is troubling that arrests were selective, primarily targeting local Moroccan youth who confronted these groups, while Maccabi fans who initiated provocations faced no consequences. The media portrayal of these events as an unprovoked anti-Semitic attack on peaceful football supporters does not reflect the full context. The visiting fans engaged in provocative behaviour, destroying private property, intimidating passers-bys, carrying flares, gathering in the city centre and directing inflammatory, racist and violent chants at locals. Many were recently discharged soldiers active in the genocide in Gaza. Their conduct at the football match itself was more than controversial, as they refused to observe the minute of silence for Valencia flood victims. One cannot engage in violent and disruptive actions and then cry anti-Semitism to avoid accountability. Our identities do not exist to absolve their actions. We find this weaponization of Jewish safety incredibly alarming. We believe that more appropriate police intervention against the initial disturbances by the Maccabi football fans, combined with a clear stance from the city, mobilizing to disperse gatherings where violent, racist, Islamophobic and homophobic things were being shouted in the public space, could have prevented the subsequent escalation of violence. This chain of events leads us to announce the cancellation of our Kristallnacht remembrance moment tomorrow, which would take place in Amsterdam. Given the current volatile situation, the heavy presence of Zionist Israels in the city with the intent of continuing acts of violence, we cannot in good faith guarantee the minimum safety of our speakers and attendees, particularly those most vulnerable in our communities. It is deeply disappointing that this violence has disrupted Jewish community life in Amsterdam, preventing us from holding this important memorial event. Interesting, isn't it, how the media keep on harping on about the safety of Jewish people and how they feel unsafe because of rabid anti-Semites criticising Israel or defending themselves from Israelis, as the people of Amsterdam have had to do. Yet here we have an example of Jewish people feeling unsafe in their own communities, not just because of Israeli thugs committing vandalism and violence, but the police apparently seeking to protect them despite their actions, and the mainstream media spinning the complete opposite of the actual truth, in the name of sticking to standards and guidelines, I suppose, when actually a blatant Zionist agenda was at play instead. Given the Netherlands currently has possibly the most right-wing government in its history right now, the fact the police are slammed by Erif Raaf most of all, I thought, in that statement, perhaps shouldn't be a surprise. Extension of government diktat, as police forces generally seem to unfortunately be. And goodness knows we're seeing that here in the UK as well, with crackdowns on protest and the arrest and seizure of equipment from anti-Zionist journalists. Journalism is now apparently a crime. That statement, for the record, was issued last Friday ahead of the planned Kristallnacht remembrance, the anniversary of which was last Saturday, where claims in the media of a pogrom being committed against Israeli thugs was the main news narrative being dished out, of course, but the anniversary of an actual pogrom, a remembrance event in memory of that, had to be cancelled. In my mind, this damns the media, damns every supposed defender of Jewish people, every citer of anti-Semitism in relation to Israeli thuggery, more than anything else. A memorial for a real pogrom had to be cancelled whilst they made up fake excuses of pogroms being carried out now to excuse Israel yet again, because there frankly never seems to be anything they won't leap to the defence of that genocidal apartheid state over. Kristallnacht, as I'm sure many of you watching this will be aware, was the so-called Night of Broken Glass, named for all the smashed windows of all the Jewish residences and businesses and synagogues throughout Germany, Austria and Sudetenland on the 9th and 10th of November 1938, mere months before the outbreak of World War II. Homes, businesses, synagogues, Jewish hospitals had sledgehammers taken to them. 30,000 Jewish men were carted off to concentration camps. 267 synagogues were destroyed. 7,000 Jewish businesses were put out of business. That is a pogrom. Football violence perpetrated by Israeli thugs is not a pogrom. And you belittle the word by associating it with such. You are no friend of Jewish people or the Jewish faith if you associate it with such. You are excusing Israeli atrocity by weaponizing it instead, and that surely makes you amongst the worst of anti-Semites if that is what you have done. Yesterday, the good people of Amsterdam defied an order by that same right-wing government of theirs that banned protest, to gather and protest, flooding their streets in Amsterdam in solidarity with Palestine, condemning those fans of Maccabi Tel Aviv, and solidarity to them for doing so. Enough of the lies. Enough is enough. The reputation of Israel is garbage these days, international pariah state as it is, despite the too often bought and paid for counter-narratives of our supposed leaders. But who exactly they are leading us in the name of, the longer they keep making these excuses, aided and abetted by billionaire media baron-owned news outlets, is another question entirely. More and more people are waking up to it, turning off those mainstream media outlets and supporting independent, honest media instead, and that is essential if the narratives of such events is ever going to be challenged and cut through. Of all of our British mainstream media covering this story and appearing to have distorted it, easily the one that has come off worst in public opinion has got to be Sky News, who went through 3 re-edits of that video footage they took, each time watering down the truth of the matter in Amsterdam as they appeared to come under continued pressure to do so, and caving into it at that, having actually covered it well to begin with. Such is the problem with big media outlets. There's always someone at the top with an agenda to shut such narratives down, to hide the truth from all of us, to publicly destroy their reputations if needs be. So widely as they've done here, though, is pretty unusual. Get all the details of that story in this video recommendation here, as you suggested next watch, and I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.